Hello, and welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Genshin Impact. My name is Azuark, and today we are going to embark on a very difficult and sensitive subject. How good are the characters on your account? It's my intent to do a swift and hasty review of each of the characters that you're likely to maybe have access to, but I also need to make sure you understand exactly what you're seeing here. The second rule of Genshin Impact is that context is king. Please do not simply look at a chart, a tier list, or some other graphic that squeezes the nuance out of the discussion and then make impulse decisions. We're going to need to talk about my evaluation process today and also consider how accurate or complete it is or isn't for you. I'm going to evaluate each character initially on a scale of 0 to 10 in three major categories: on-field capability, offensive support, and defensive support. On-field is going to refer to how good they are at being the focal point of your team, playing primarily that character. Offensive support is anything that will help your team's damage output, which includes buffs, debuffs, grouping, elemental application, and direct damage. Defensive support is how good this character is at helping your team stay alive and functioning, primarily via healing or shielding. In principle, this should encompass everything you need about a character role. Additionally, we need to include their weapon type, their element, which stats they care about, and any other special notes, like if they're good for overworld traversal. With over 90 characters in the game, we've got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to burn through these as quickly as I can manage, but please remember that I am not an encyclopedia, and I do not have complete knowledge over all of these characters. Additionally, many of my remarks will be subjective, and there is a good chance I'm going to leave a ton of details to the wayside in the interests of brevity. This is not meant to be a full character review and certainly not a guide, so much as just a very quick benchmark to give you a starting point. If I'm going to make a team building guide that says use a healer, an offensive support, and an on-field damage dealer, it's pretty crummy of me to not tell you which characters those are. And that's all this video is. Got it? Okay, let's get started. We're going to burn through the different variants of Traveler real fast because there's not a lot to say. Anemo Traveler deals pitiful damage, pushes enemies away when you usually want them pulled towards you, and is not even very good for swirl setups. Geo Traveler is a little better. The boulders their skill summons come on a quick cooldown, and you can have up to 3 of them on the field. Unfortunately, they are often more of a hindrance than a help, even if you can use them to climb to higher levels. Enemies can get boosted on them by accident, and they serve as an obstruction during combat. I barely even remember Electro Traveler. They use energy to summon pickups, which provide energy, but the funny thing is that they aren't very good at generating energy, so they usually want to pick them up themselves, which basically defeats the point, and they bring basically nothing else to the table. Dendro Traveler is the only variant I have nice things to say about. They function a little like Dendro Kaeya in that their skill shoots a burst of elemental energy in front of them on a quick cooldown, and their burst does AE damage. A very different style of AE damage, but it's actually respectable and comes with moderate Dendro application, meaning they can be used in a Quicken or even a Bloom team. Hydro Traveler, I've literally never even unlocked Hydro Traveler. Based on reputation alone, I've avoided this because somehow miHoYo took the strongest element in the game and made an absolutely terrible character with it. Hydro Traveler can hit for some damage if you don't mind standing still and waiting for it, but they have little to offer. Meanwhile, as of this recording, Pyro and Cryo Traveler haven't been added to the game yet. We're all hoping Pyro Traveler is actually respectable, and there's a solid reason why it isn't unlocked merely by walking into Natlan. So now let's talk about your first 3 teammates, starting with Amber. She may have a winning personality, but sadly, as a playable character, Amber's not very good. Baron Bunny's taunt is inconsistent, as is the ability to detonate him for damage, or to not detonate him for extended taunting. Amber's burst is done and spent way too quickly and doesn't deal enough damage to justify itself. For combat purposes, Amber is simply left best on the bench. However, her one bright spot is that she's very useful in early game exploration due to the game's reliance on pyro and bow-oriented puzzles. And don't forget about her passive bonus to gliding. Lisa is a little funny to learn to use. Her elemental skill is meant to be held rather than pressed, at which point it charges up around her. Lisa's vulnerable during this charge, but it leaves a mark on enemies that she can trigger for extra damage with a charged attack. In practical settings, this is usually too slow to be useful, which limits her primarily to her burst, provided you can gather the energy for it. Lisa tosses a lantern that looks like the ones the Season mages carry and zaps nearby enemies. There are much better Electro characters, but they aren't guaranteed at the start of the game, so if you need Electro, she's always an option. This means that out of the starting trio, Kaeya is your best bet. This doesn't make him an amazing character, but he's serviceable. With a quick elemental skill that you can easily swap to and use at a moment's notice, and being a decent recipient of your prototype Rancor, especially if you can find an Electro for Superconduct, Kaeya is perfectly fine to use as your initial carry until you find someone better, and he can also be used respectively in support. He's also possibly your only option for getting to distant places across water. Noelle is available for free off the beginner banner, and there's a very strong possibility you'll need her. Her elemental skill shields the team, and if you keep her on field through it and attack, she will slowly heal the team. Make sure you give her strong defense stats if you want her to be effective. Noelle can also output some damage if you activate her burst, which allows her to swing a massive pillar of Geo around for noticeable damage in a very large arc. There are better healers, but you might not get another shielder for a while, and you could do far worse than to build your first team around Noelle, since she's very easily kept around in a support role later. Barbara is an unusual character because neither her skill nor her burst do any damage whatsoever. The skill produces a very slow heal over time, but during its effect, Barbara's attacks heal the team, similar to Noelle. Unlike Noelle, Barbara's burst is also defensive, being an instant team-wide heal that is best used as an emergency recovery option since you won't get it back very quickly. Barbara can also be used to apply Hydro to enemies, but mostly this is used to tear down Pyro shields since it's usually not very good otherwise. Xiangling is the one free character that is hailed by the community as being quite good. I'm going to pump the brakes a little on that because she is, but in very specific contexts. In a team with Bennett, while clearing domain challenges, Xiangling is fantastic, especially supported by a Hydro or Cryo teammate. However, her skill summons Guoba, who is extremely unreliable targeting. Her burst, while powerful, requires a tremendous amount of energy. She simply isn't all that great to use in the overworld. If you want to start working with her as a long-term prospect, be my guest, but I see her as more a character you'll value having later, rather than at AR20. Oh, and don't rely on Guoba to light torches, please. Collei is available after floor 4 of the Spiral Abyss, which means you won't be getting her until at least AR25. By that time, you can reasonably take your Traveler to Sumeru, and they tend to generally be a better Dendro option for your team, but not by much. My exposure to Collei is extremely limited, but she is basically known as just a character who applies some Dendro to set up reactions and happens to use a bow. There isn't anything particularly remarkable to say about her one way or the other. I know even less about using Lynette, simply because I haven't had incentive to try her out. Lynette is your first Animo alternative to Traveler at AR25, but she can be quite good. Her main use is her burst, which produces a summon that taunts, deals Animo damage, and can absorb an element that it also deals damage with. Her elemental skill lunges forward to hit enemies with Animo, and has a hold version that causes her to run forward quickly first. Important to note that it also causes her health to drain, which is a frequent feature of Fontaine characters. And our final character for today will be Kachina, who becomes available after the Liyue Archon quest is complete, so sometime after AR28. Kachina serves as our introduction to Natlin and its Night Soul mechanic, but because of that, she is significantly better to use in Natlin than outside it. Anywhere else, you can use her drill to deal modest off-field geo damage, but her best feature is that you can use it to climb cliff walls, which sadly does not last very long without phlogiston. If you could switch to her to scale steep cliff walls in Liyue, I would say her overworld traversal would make her a worthy inclusion in your team, but sadly Kachina doesn't bring much to the table. Alright, so that wraps up a rundown of your truly free characters. Again, please remember that these are just quick impressions and should not be your only source of info if there is a character you're interested in. We'll hit on the release 4 stars tomorrow, so thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.